We'll stop here for a moment. If you just step off the footpath with me, thank you. Now, this may be a little bit of modern history, but you're looking at Thompson Bay. You remember I spoke about Thompson earlier, the first settler here? The bay is named after him. Now, just as a matter of interest, this is purely modern history. You'll notice all those moorings out there. During the summer, Christmas breaks, you could walk from one end of the bay, the south end, to the north end and not get your feet wet. There'd be that many boats in this bay. Also, this bay is home to 6 shipwrecks. The first one was in 1842, out on the reef out there, and the last one, coincidentally, was in 1942 on the sand over there. So we still have shipwrecks in this bay. Looking down here, this is called Vincent Way. Now, Vincent Way has been recognised as one of the best preserved 1800s precincts in Australia. Right, this is the first house we're going to look at. Built in the late 1840s, of limestone from the quarries I mentioned, which is around about 100 metres to the west of me now, which today, incidentally, once again, we make use of everything. It's a mini golf course and a family fun park. All of the work was done by Aboriginal prisoners, and most of them had never seen a cross-cut saw before today, and they just cut as and when they could. But the whole building was built like you can see this wall here. Henry Vincent built this first building here for his wife and family, and at the far end of it he built quarters for the soldiers or jailers. He'd only just been settled in here for a while, and the governor of the day came over, and being an English gentleman he had a lot of privileges, and he stated that Perth and Fremantle were far too hot and smelly for an English gentleman in summertime. He needed a house at Rottnest. And he said, well, where is the best house? Well, basically this was the only house of any standing on the island. So poor old Henry was told, go and build yourself another one. This is going to be the governor's house. So Henry then had to build another house further up the road. You'll notice if you look at it that it has a vaguely military look to it with the high parapet at the front, and those embrasures in it could be almost an embrasure in a fort. So if you look at the building like that, it gives the resemblance of being a military building. As a matter of interest, the windows and doors here, he built the building and left an opening for a window and a door and sent the measurements to the Fremantle jail, where they actually made the joinery work to fit here. And if the measurements weren't too exact, he just hacked a bit more limestone out or put a bit in. That's the reason they are all of odd shapes and sizes. We can also deduce from it who was making these windows and doing the glazing in the Fremantle jail. And if they were English, they had a window like this with very small panes of glass. And if they were continental, as further up you'll see, the windows have larger panes of glass. And that's the difference between the two areas. You can walk along here now and have a look. Today, it's holiday accommodation, and this is the best holiday accommodation on the island. They sleep 6 to 8 minimum in each cottage, so if you break it back to a bed price, it's quite reasonable. But just have a look at all these buildings. They're so alike, and they are restored to as close as original as we can make it, and still have accommodation that people would desire today. Now, this building in front of us has a rather interesting history, and it is actually slightly different to the rest of the buildings on the island. Henry had sole control of this island. He was the king of Rottnest, and one of the governors decided he had too much sway on the island, so the governor decided to appoint a storekeeper to the island. He appointed a young fellow by the name of Francis Armstrong, who was to be the storekeeper on the island, and also he was to be the keeper of the Aboriginal prisoners' moral welfare. He told Henry Vincent to build him a house, and Henry protested furiously for quite an amount of time because he didn't want anybody else to have any control or say on the island. But he eventually built this house, and he showed he was a little bit on the devious side. He built it slightly lower in floor level than anywhere else along here, so that it would flood in winter time. Incidentally, that this house has a slightly different roof structure. That is only the second set of shingles on the roof since 1860. Francis Armstrong and his wife and young family moved in here. Only a young fellow in his early 20s, and he could speak the Aboriginal dialects, which is one of the reasons he had the job. And he just settled in, and they decided to move the pilot boat service from Fremantle back to Rottnest because there were still ships being wrecked on Rottnest. And it made a lot of sense to have the pilot boat here. So Henry was told he had to build a house for the new captain of the pilot boat, Captain Back. So he said, I can't build one in time, but I'll give him this house. So he evicted Francis Armstrong, and this became the house of the pilot. And he said to poor old Francis Armstrong, there's a house up in the middle of the island near our lighthouse, Wadjum Hill, and there's a house almost complete. You can finish that off and go up there. So Francis Armstrong with his wife and family went up there. But unfortunately, it was 6 kilometres away, about an hour's ride on horseback. He was having to get up at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning to get down here to open the store to provide the pork, the cabbage, the porridge, etc. for the day for the cooks. And it got to the point where he went back to the mainland. Henry had won the day, and Francis Armstrong decided he wasn't going to be here any longer. He wasn't doing any good, and he went back to the mainland. However, he must have been a good, God-fearing young fellow, because twice Henry was accused of mistreating Aboriginal prisoners and brought before a magistrate. And each time, Francis Armstrong came to court and spoke up in Henry's favour, and he was acquitted each time. You'll notice that the house is white. All the houses along here were white, and it's a white lime wash. There was no such thing as damp courses in those days, or waterproof paints or anything of that nature, and lime wash was the obvious solution. However, the skippers of the square riggers coming from Fremantle over here claimed that they could not see the lead marks into Thompson Bay for the glare from the white buildings and the white seawall, which is obvious because in those days there was no such thing as sunglasses. So Henry, in a very resourceful manner, took his barrels of lime wash and tossed old horseshoes and any bit of old metal junk he could find into them, with the result that he got this Rottnest ochre colour, and that's the colour everything is painted today. We'll go down now and have a look at the pilot boathouse itself.